The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning, same as it always did. Daniel Mercer reached across the nightstand before the second beep, killing the sound with the practiced reflex of a man who had done it 10,000 times before. He lay still for a moment in the gray dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that had settled between him and Carol like a third person sharing their bed. She was awake. He could tell by the way she was breathing, too controlled, too deliberate. The kind of breathing a person does when they're pretending to sleep because speaking feels like more than they can manage. He didn't say anything either. He sat up slowly, his back protesting the way it always did now, a deep grinding ache that ran from his left shoulder blade down to his hip. 44 years old and already moving like a man 20 years older. The farm did that. It borrowed from your body the way the bank borrowed from your account, quietly, consistently, until one day you checked and there was almost nothing left. He pulled on his jeans in the dark, found his flannel shirt on the chair by the window, and walked out of the bedroom without looking back. The kitchen was cold. The linoleum floor had a crack running from the base of the refrigerator to the edge of the back door that he kept meaning to fix and never did. A stack of envelopes sat on the corner of the table. He didn't need to open them to know what they said. The return addresses were enough. First National Agricultural Bank, Iowa Department of Revenue, Heartland Equipment Financing. He put the coffee on and stood at the window, looking out at the fields. It was late September, and the corn was as tall as it was going to get. In the moonlight, it stood silver and dense, row after row, stretching back toward the property line a quarter-mile away. His grandfather, Roy Mercer, had planted the first crop on this land in 1951. His father, Glenn Mercer, had expanded it across 3 additional parcels through the 1970s, and Daniel had held it together, barely, stubbornly, at enormous personal cost, for the past 18 years since his father's heart gave out on a Tuesday afternoon in the East Field. He poured his coffee and drank it standing up. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Owen's room. His son was 17 and moved through the house like a ghost these days, present but untouchable, communicating mostly in single-syllable responses and the specific kind of silence that teenagers deploy when they want you to understand you've failed them without having to say it out loud. Daniel couldn't blame him. He understood the feeling. He was in the field by 5:15, walking the rows the way his father had taught him, slow, deliberate, hands brushing the stalks on either side, feeling for problems before he could see them. Corn borers, drought stress, fungal spotting on the lower leaves. His eyes moved automatically, cataloging and assessing, even as his mind was somewhere else entirely. In 4 days, it would be their 20th wedding anniversary. He and Carol had gotten married on the first Saturday of October, 2006, in the First Lutheran Church on Maple Street in Hargrove, Iowa. Population 2,340. The whole town had come, practically. Carol's mother had cried through the entire ceremony. His best friend, Pete Dalloway, had given a toast that made everyone laugh, and then, unexpectedly, made half the room reach for napkins. They had been happy. He needed to remember that. There had been real, uncomplicated happiness in the early years, the first summer together on the farm, when Carol used to bring him lunch out to the fields and they'd sit in the truck, bed, and eat sandwiches and talk about everything they were going to build. The way she laughed back then, the way she used to reach across the distance between them without thinking, like gravity. He didn't know exactly when that had stopped. It wasn't one thing. It never was one thing. It was the accumulation, the years of financial stress, the arguments that started about money and ended about everything else. The dreams she had quietly folded up and put away because the farm demanded all of their resources and most of their energy. She had wanted to go back to school for landscape architecture. She had a gift for it, could look at a barren patch of ground and see what it wanted to become. That dream had been deferred so many times, it had eventually just stopped coming up in conversation. He walked to the center of the field and stopped. This section, the middle 2 acres of the northeast parcel, had always been Carol's favorite part of the property. She'd told him once, years ago, that when she was having a terrible day, she'd come out here and stand in the middle of the rows and feel the whole world get quiet. "It feels like the heart of the farm," she'd said. "Like everything else grows outward from here." He stood there now, in the dark, with coffee cooling in his hand, and looked at the space around him. An idea arrived the way the most important ideas usually do, not with fanfare, but quietly, the way water finds its level. Breakfast was a tense, efficient affair. Carol came downstairs at 7, dressed for her shift at Hargrove Medical Clinic, where she'd been working as an administrative coordinator for the past 6 years. She was 53 inches of composed practical T, dark hair going silver at the temples now, eyes that were still the same shade of deep brown they'd been when he met her, a face that had learned over the years to keep its own counsel. She poured coffee. She made toast. She set Owen's plate out on the table before calling up the stairs. "Owen." "Breakfast." A muffled sound from upstairs, neither agreement nor refusal. She sat down across from Daniel and looked at the stack of envelopes. "Did you open them?" she asked. "Not yet, Daniel." "I know." "The one from First National." I said, "I know, Carol." The words came out harder than he intended. She didn't flinch. She was past flinching, but her jaw tightened slightly, and she turned her attention to her toast with the careful focus of someone choosing not to respond. Owen came downstairs 3 minutes later, backpack over one shoulder, earbuds already in. He was tall, taller than Daniel now, which still surprised him sometimes with his mother's brown eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. He grabbed the plate without sitting down. "I'm eating at Marcus's before school," he said. "I made that for—" Carol started. "I'll take it with me." He was already moving toward the door. "Owen," Daniel's voice. His son stopped, turned. The expression on his face was not hostility exactly. It was something worse. It was the careful blankness of a young man who has decided that hoping for something from his father leads only to disappointment, and has adjusted his expectations accordingly. "What?" Owen said. Daniel looked at him for a moment. There were 17 things he wanted to say. He said none of them. "Have a good day," he said. Something moved behind Owen's eyes, gone before Daniel could read it. "Yeah," his son said, and left. The back door closed. The house was quiet. Carol was looking at the table. "He has a college counseling meeting Thursday," she said. "I already told his school you'd be there. I'll be there. I need you to actually be there, Daniel. Not to call me at noon and say something came up with the irrigation. I said I'll be there." She looked at him then, directly, assessingly, with the eyes of a woman who has heard many promises and learned to calibrate them carefully. "Okay," she said, not warmly, but without anger either. Just the flat, exhausted okay of someone who has stopped fighting and hasn't yet decided what comes next. She gathered her bag and her keys. "There's leftover chili in the fridge," she said. "Don't forget to eat." And she was gone. Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table with the stack of envelopes and the dregs of his coffee and the idea that had come to him in the cornfield in the dark. He pulled out his phone and called Pete Dalloway. Pete answered on the second ring, which meant he was already up and at the hardware store he'd been running on Central Avenue for the past 12 years. "Mercer," Pete said. "What are you doing calling at 7:30? You never call before 9. I need your help with something." A pause. Pete Dalloway knew Daniel well enough to hear the specific weight in his voice. "How big is this something?" Pete asked. Daniel looked out the window at the fields. "Pretty big," he said. "And I need it done before Saturday." Another pause. "Saturday as in this Saturday, 4 days from now?" "Yeah." "Daniel, what? It's their anniversary," Daniel said quietly. "Our anniversary. 20 years. The line was silent for a moment. "Okay," Pete said. "Tell me what you need." What Daniel needed was not simple. He needed lumber, specific dimensions, rough cut, the kind that looked like it belonged in a field rather than a showroom. He needed string lights, hundreds of feet of them, the warm amber kind. He needed help clearing a space in the exact center of the northeast cornfield, not cutting the corn down, but carefully bending and guiding the stalks to create a natural room. A clearing roughly 30 feet across, the walls formed by living corn rather than harvested emptiness. He needed a small platform built, nothing elaborate, just enough to lift 2 chairs and a table above the ground level. He needed Carol's old portable record player brought up from the basement without her noticing, and cleaned, and made to work again. He needed the specific record she'd played at their wedding reception, Patsy Cline, Always, which he was fairly sure was in the box marked Misc Records that lived under the basement stairs. And he needed it all done without Carol or Owen knowing anything about it. "This is either the most romantic thing you've ever done," Pete said, standing in the cornfield on Wednesday evening while Daniel sketched out the clearing dimensions with a stick in the dirt, "or you're having some kind of episode." "Could be both," Daniel said. Pete laughed, a short, genuine sound. He was 51, heavy-set, with a red beard going gray and the permanently squinting expression of a man who spent too much time in windy parking lots. He had known Daniel since the 4th grade. He had been at their wedding. He had also been at the bank meeting 3 years ago, when the loan officer had laid out the repayment terms in a tone of voice that made Daniel feel, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely small. "Does Carol know things are as bad as they are?" Pete asked, his voice dropping. Daniel kept drawing lines in the dirt. "She knows it's bad," he said. "She doesn't know how bad." "Daniel, I know." "The foreclosure notice, Pete." His voice was flat, final. "I know. I'm dealing with it." Pete looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who wants to push harder and knows better. "All right," he said. "Let's figure out what we can get done by Saturday." They worked the first evening until past 10. Pete drove back to the hardware store and returned with the lumber and a work light that ran off a generator, and the two of them began the careful work of shaping the clearing, moving through the corn rows with their hands, gently redirecting the stalks, creating a space that looked less like it had been built and more like it had always been there, waiting. Daniel's neighbor, Ruth Kaminsky, showed up at 8:30 with a casserole dish and a suspicious expression. Ruth was 67 and had lived on the adjacent property since before Daniel was born. She'd been close with his mother. After his parents died, his mother from cancer in 2019. His father years before, she'd folded the caretaking instincts she had toward them onto Daniel like a handed-down coat, whether he wanted it or not. "What are you two doing out here?" she demanded, standing at the field's edge with the casserole in her hands, the work light throwing long shadows across the rows. Pete opened his mouth. "Anniversary thing," Daniel said. Ruth looked at the lumber, at the string lights coiled on the ground, at the careful clearing beginning to take shape in the middle of the field. Something changed in her face, a softening so quick it was almost invisible. 20 years, she asked. "Saturday." She was quiet for a moment. Then she thrust the casserole dish at Pete. "You'll both be useless if you don't eat," she said. "And Daniel." She fixed him with a look that contained multitudes. "Whatever you're trying to say to that woman, say it right. You've been swallowing words for too long." She walked back toward her property without waiting for a response. Pete stared at the casserole. "That woman," he said, "is always terrifying and always correct." Thursday arrived with a skin of frost on the fields and a flat gray sky pressing down over Hargrove. Daniel kept moving. He worked on the clearing in the mornings before Carol left for work, and again each evening after she went upstairs. He ate standing at the counter. He slept 4 hours a night and didn't feel it, or rather, felt it completely but found he didn't mind, because for the first time in months, he was moving towards something instead of away. The platform came together cleanly, 2 inches of elevation, enough to feel intentional, the wood still smelling of the mill. Pete brought the string lights Thursday afternoon, and they began the slow work of running them through the corn stalks surrounding the clearing, threading them upward and across so that when lit they would form a canopy of amber light of the space. "How are you going to get her out here?" Pete asked, untangling a section of lights with his teeth. I haven't figured that out yet, Daniel. I'll figure it out. You need a plan. Carol is not a woman who walks into cornfields in the dark without a reason. I know my wife. Then you know she's going to need a reason. He did know his wife. That was, in some ways, the most painful part of all of this, knowing her well enough to understand how far they had drifted, knowing her well enough to see clearly that she was making plans of her own, plans that moved away from him and the farm and Hargrove, Iowa, and towards something she hadn't told him yet, but that he could feel in the atmosphere of their house, like a change in barometric pressure. He'd found the brochure 3 weeks ago. College of Design at Iowa State. Certificate programs in landscape architecture and environmental planning. She'd left it in the recycling bin, whether by accident or as a kind of quiet announcement. He still didn't know. He hadn't brought it up, but he'd kept it. It was in his truck's glove compartment now. Thursday evening, Owen came home from school and found his father at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing something by hand. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Owen asked. "Writing." "Writing what?" Daniel looked up. His son's face was doing the guarded thing again. But there was something underneath it, the same thing that had flickered and disappeared that morning, earlier in the week. Curiosity. The involuntary curiosity of a boy who is trying very hard not to need his father. "Something for your mom," Daniel said. Owen looked at the legal pad, looked at his father. "Her anniversary is Saturday," he said. "I know. You actually remembered?" The words carried a full history inside them, every missed school event, every canceled plan, every dinner table conversation that had detoured into farm stress before dessert. Daniel absorbed it without defending himself. "I remembered," he said quietly. Owen was still for a moment, and he dropped his backpack on the floor, not in his usual deliberately careless way, but just dropped it, without calculation, and walked to the refrigerator. "What are you making her?" he asked, his back to his father. "Something in the field, the northeast corner." A pause. "The corn's still up," Owen said. "Yeah, that's the point." His son stood with the refrigerator door open, not taking anything, the cold light falling across his face. Daniel watched him process this. "Do you need help?" Owen asked, very quietly, like the question cost him something. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, a movement in something that had been locked in place for so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, I do." Owen worked without being asked twice. Friday after school, he was in the field alongside his father and Pete, running extension cords through the rows, securing the string lights to the corn stalks with small cable ties. He didn't say much, but he worked with his father's efficiency and his mother's eye for detail, stepping back periodically to assess the effect, adjusting a strand of lights here or a chair's position there. At one point, Daniel looked across the clearing and saw his son standing at the edge with his arms crossed, studying the space with an expression that was open in a way he hadn't seen in years. "It looks good," Owen said, like he was surprised. "Pete helped," Daniel said. "It looks like something she'd like," Owen said, more quietly. They stood together in the early evening light, the corn rising on all sides, the clearing taking its final shape around them, the platform with its 2 chairs and small table, the string lights waiting to blaze, the old record player sitting on a wooden crate with the Patsy Cline record, cleaned and ready, the table set with Carol's grandmother's plates that Daniel had carefully brought out from the china cabinet she never used anymore. Pete appeared at the edge of the clearing holding a thermos and looking at what they'd made with the expression of a man who is unexpectedly moved. "Daniel," he said. "Don't," Daniel said. "I'm just saying, Pete, it's beautiful, man." Daniel looked at the cleared space, the amber lights, the living walls of corn. The table set for 2 in the middle of a field his grandfather had broken, and his father had worked, and he had nearly lost. He thought about 20 years. About the weight of all the words he hadn't said. About Carol's face in the mornings, careful and composed and far away. "I just need her to walk in here," he said. Owen looked at him. "I'll make sure she does." his son said. Friday morning, Hargrove woke under a sky the color of pewter, the kind of flat Midwestern overcast that could mean nothing or could mean everything, depending on what the wind decided by afternoon. Deborah Holloway noticed the lights first. She was up at 5:30 the way she always was, walking her arthritic beagle, Chester, along the gravel road that ran between the Mercer property and the old Stanton field. Deborah was 62, recently retired from the county assessor's office, and constitutionally incapable of minding her own business, a quality she described, without irony, as community engagement. She stopped dead on the road when she saw the glow. It was subtle, just the pale pre-dawn quality of string lights seen from a distance, bleeding amber through the gaps between the corn rows. But it was unmistakably there, in the northeast parcel, where there was absolutely no reason for any light to be. Chester sat down in the road and looked up at her. "I see it too," she said. She stood there for a full minute, watching. No movement. No sound except the wind across the tops of the stalks. Then she turned around and walked home, faster than her usual pace, and by 6:15 she had texted her neighbor Linda Foss, and by 7 o'clock Linda had told her husband Bill, and by 8 the information had traveled the specific invisible network that operates in small towns with the efficiency of a fiber optic cable. Something is happening at the Mercer farm. The thing about Hargrove was that the town had been watching the Mercer family for a while. Not with malice, rarely with malice, though there were one or two exceptions in any community. Mostly with the genuine invested concern of people who have known a family across generations and feel, whether invited or not, that they have a stake in the outcome. They knew about the debt. Financial difficulties spread through a small farming community the way water moves through cracked ground, quietly, inevitably, finding every low point. People knew about the loan. They knew about the bad crop year in 2022, when the drought had taken 20% of the corn, and the insurance adjuster had come out with a form that gave back about half of what was lost. They knew Daniel had sold the South 40 acres to a neighboring operation the previous spring, and they knew what that meant. They also knew about Carol, not in an unkind way. But people had noticed that she'd been spending more time in town lately, coffee at Margie's diner that stretched past the second cup, conversations with people she hadn't been particularly close with before, the particular social behavior of a woman who is quietly widening her world in preparation for something. She'd registered for a drawing class at the community center, had lunch twice with Connie Reeves, who was a real estate agent. Nobody said it out loud. But people had started doing the math, and then there were the lights in the field and Deborah Holloway's text message. And by Friday afternoon, the quiet question humming through Hargrove was, what is Daniel Mercer doing out there? Carol Mercer spent Friday in a state of careful, deliberate composure. She was good at composure. She had constructed it over years the way you construct any load-bearing wall, gradually, with quality materials, testing it as you built. It was not coldness. She wanted to be clear about that, at least in her own mind. It was not indifference. It was the thing you build when you love someone and the love has become painful and you need a structure between yourself and the pain in order to function. She processed insurance referrals and appointment backlogs at the clinic with her usual efficiency. She had lunch alone in the break room with a book. She answered an email from Iowa State. The landscape architecture certificate program had rolling admissions through November. She had not applied yet. She was not sure she was going to, but she had the email open, and sometimes that was its own kind of decision. At 3:15, her coworker Sandra Briggs leaned into the break room with the specific expression of someone carrying information. "What?" Carol said without looking up from her book. "You're going to hear this from somebody," Sandra said, "and I'd rather you heard it from me." She sat down across the table. "Deborah Holloway saw lights in your cornfield at 5 this morning." Carol looked up. Lights, string lights, the amber kind, in the northeast parcel. Sandra paused. And Pete Dalloway's truck has been parked outside your property every evening this week. Carol was very still. Is this something Daniel is doing? Sandra asked carefully. Carol thought about the mornings this week. Danielle already gone when she came downstairs, or moving around the house with an energy she couldn't quite characterize. The legal pad on the kitchen table. The way Owen had been quieter than usual, but not in his closed-off way. More in the way of someone who knows something and is actively choosing not to say it. The anniversary was tomorrow. I don't know, Carol said, which was true. And the truest part of it was not the not knowing, it was the specific feeling that accompanied the not knowing. A feeling she hadn't expected. Something cautious and involuntary, like a door she'd thought was sealed, shifting slightly on its hinges. She closed her book. I need to get back to work, she said. That evening she came home to find the kitchen clean. This was not normal. The kitchen was Daniel's designated disaster area, the one space in the house where entropy ruled unchallenged. Dishes in the sink, rings from coffee cups on the counter. The stack of farm publications that multiplied like organisms on the chair nobody sat in. All of it was gone. The counter was clear. The dishes were done. There were flowers, actual flowers, grocery store sunflowers, nothing fancy, in the mason jar she used as a vase, sitting in the middle of the table. Owen was sitting at the table doing homework, which was also not entirely normal. Hi, he said. Hi. She set her bag down slowly. Where's your father? He ate early. Owen paused in a way that was clearly not a natural pause. He's out. Kara looked at her son. Her son looked at his homework with slightly too much attention. Owen, he said he'd be back in a little while. She went upstairs and changed. She stood at the window in the bedroom for a moment, looking out at the fields. The sun was going down, that particular Iowa sunset that went pink and orange, and then violet in layers across the flat horizon, the corn silhouetted against it in the distance. She thought about 20 years. She thought about the envelope she'd been composing in her head, not written yet, but drafted and revised in her mind over months. The one that explained, calmly and without cruelty, that she thought they had reached a point where they needed to talk honestly about what came next. Not necessarily an ending, but a reckoning. An acknowledgement that what they had built together had changed shape, and they needed to look at it clearly. She hadn't sent it. She kept revising it. She went back downstairs and ate the dinner that Owen had apparently heated up without being asked. And they sat together at the table, the two of them, without Daniel, which was more common than it should have been. And Owen was different tonight. Not effusive, not chatty, but present in a way that was distinct from his usual studied absence. He told her about his college counseling meeting. He'd been thinking about agricultural sciences at Iowa State, he said. She looked at him. Really? She said. He shrugged in the elaborate way 17-year-olds shrug. Maybe. I don't know. I like the land part. He said it carefully, like he was testing the weight of the words. I hate the money part, but I like the land. Kara looked at her son and felt something complex and tender move through her. Your great-grandfather Roy would have said those are the only two parts, she said. Owen almost smiled. Yeah, they did the dishes together. When Daniel came in through the back door at 9 o'clock, smelling of earth and sawdust, Carol was reading in the living room. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Hey, he said. Hey. He looked like he hadn't slept much. There was something different in his face. Not the closed-off exhaustion she was used to, but something that looked almost like nervousness. On Daniel Mercer, nervousness was so foreign it looked like a different person wearing his face. Tomorrow, he said, would you? He stopped, started again. Can you be free tomorrow afternoon, around 4? She looked at him. Why? I want to show you something. She held his gaze for a long moment. Reading him the way 20 years teaches you to read a person, the specific tightness around his eyes, the way he was holding his hands very deliberately still at his sides, the almost imperceptible lift of his chin that meant he had staked something personal on whatever he was about to say. "Okay," she said. He nodded, went to the kitchen. She heard the sound of the faucet, the creak of the cabinet where he kept the pain medication for his back, the particular clunk of his boots being set by the back door. She looked at her book without reading it for a while. "Okay," she had said. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but she'd said it. Across town, Pete Dalloway was on the phone with his wife, Gretchen. "Tell me again what he built," Gretchen said. "A clearing in the corn. String lights all through the stalks. A platform with a table and 2 chairs. Carol's grandmother's china. The record player. Silence on the line." "Pete," Gretchen said. "That man, I know. After everything this year, Gretch, I know. Does she know how bad it is? The foreclosure? She doesn't know everything." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I think she knows it's serious. But Daniel hasn't. He doesn't talk about what he can't fix. You know how he is. How are they going to?" "I don't know," Pete said. "I don't know what happens after tomorrow. The bank stuff is real, and it doesn't go away. But I think," he paused, looking for the words, "I think he's trying to remind her why it's worth figuring out together, instead of alone." A long silence. "I want to walk by that field tomorrow," Gretchen said. "Gretch, not close, just past." Pete sighed. "You and Deborah Holloway both. The whole town is going to be walking past that field tomorrow, Pete. You know that." He did know that. Ruth Kaminsky knew it too. She stood at her kitchen window Friday night, looking across the dark distance toward the Mercer property. She could see the faint amber warmth of the string lights from here. He'd left them on, testing them, and they made the corn glow in the dark in a way that was entirely unlike anything she'd seen in 67 years of living next to these fields. She thought about Daniel's mother, Margaret Mercer. She thought about the afternoon Margaret had sat at this very kitchen table, 3 months before the cancer diagnosis, and told Ruth that her greatest worry wasn't herself, it was Daniel. "He loves so hard and so quietly," Margaret had said. "I'm afraid one day Carol will look over and not be able to tell." Ruth looked at the glowing field. She'll be able to tell now, she thought. Saturday arrived clear. The overnight clouds had pushed east, and the dawn came in clean and pale over the flat Iowa horizon. The sky going from charcoal to ash to the particular translucent blue of an early October morning. The frost that had threatened all week held off. The temperature by 9 was already at 58 degrees and climbing. Daniel was up at 4:30. He went to the field in the dark and walked the clearing one final time, checking everything with a flashlight. The string lights were all intact. The platform had no wobble. The china on the table was covered with a clean dish towel to protect it from dew. The record player was on the wooden crate, the Patsy Cline record sleeved and waiting. He stood in the center of the clearing for a long time. The corn surrounded him on all sides, the stalks close enough to touch if he spread his arms, the whole field utterly quiet except for the faint movement of air through the leaves. Above him, through the gap in the canopy formed by the clearing, the last stars were still visible, going pale as the sky lightened. He was 44 years old. He had worked this land for more of his life than not. He had built almost nothing except the farm, not wealth, not security, not the life he'd promised Carol in that church on Maple Street 20 years ago. The bank owned more of this ground than he did. The years had taken more than they'd given back most seasons. But he was still here, on his grandfather's land, under a sky that had been watching this family for 3 generations. He thought about what Ruth had said. "Whatever you're trying to say to that woman, say it right." He pulled out the legal pad. Owen came downstairs at 8 to find his father at the kitchen table with reading glasses he normally refused to wear, going over handwritten notes on the yellow legal pad. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something baking. Danielle had made biscuits, badly, but they were in the oven. Owen sat down across from him. "Is it ready?" he asked. "Yeah." Daniel set the pad down. "Yeah, it's ready." Owen poured himself coffee. He'd been drinking it since 16. Another inheritance. And sat back in his chair looking at his father with the particular evaluating gaze of a teenager who is revising his opinion of someone in real time and isn't sure how to handle it. "What are you writing?" he asked. "What I want to say to her." "You're going to read from notes?" No, I'm trying to figure out what I actually want to say." Daniel looked at the pad. "You know how some people can just talk? Like the words come out right when they need to?" "Mom can do that," Owen said. "Yeah, your mom can do that." He turned the pad over, face down on the table. "I've never been able to. I always say it wrong or I don't say it at all. And then it just..." He made a gesture with his hand. "Gone." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Then say the thing you've been not saying," Owen said. "Like just that. Start there." Daniel looked at his son. Owen shrugged the elaborate shrug. But it was different today. Less defensive. More like the shrug of someone who actually means it's not complicated, just hard. "The biscuits are burning," Owen said. They were. Daniel got up and rescued them. Carol spent the morning in the garden. She did this when she needed to think. Had always done it since they first moved to the farm. Tending the quarter-acre behind the house that she'd shaped over years into something that was entirely her creation, in a life that was very much shared. There were late asters still blooming in the beds, purple and white, and she deadheaded them methodically, her hands working while her mind moved over the terrain of the past months. She was going to apply to the certificate program. She'd decided, in the night, in the clarity that comes at 3 in the morning, when the defenses are down and you can hear yourself think. She was going to apply, and she was going to tell Daniel. And they were going to have a real conversation about what they wanted. Not a fight, not an avoidance, but an actual conversation, like adults who have built something together and need to assess what it is, honestly. She'd been avoiding that conversation for over a year. Afraid of what she'd find when they had it. Afraid that what she'd find was two people who had grown so far apart that the distance had become the relationship. But last night, the clean kitchen, the sunflowers in the mason jar, the way Daniel had stood in the doorway with that foreign nervousness on his face, asking her to be free at 4 tomorrow. Last night, something had shifted slightly, the way barometric pressure shifts before weather, and she wasn't sure what it meant, but she felt it. She clipped the last of the asters and stood up, her back aching pleasantly. Dirt under her fingernails, looking at the garden she'd made. "It feels like the heart of the farm," she had told him once about the northeast field. She still believed that, even now when she wasn't sure what she believed about much else. Sandra called at 11. "How are you?" Sandra asked, in the voice that contained several layers. "I'm fine," Carol said. "Are you nervous?" "Sandra, I don't even know what he's doing. The whole town knows, Carol." A pause. "Well, we don't know exactly, but we know it's something. Deborah said she went past this morning and the lights were..." She said it looked. Another pause. "You should just go see. I'm going at 4. He asked me to go at 4. "Of course, yes, obviously." Sandra's voice softened. "He loves you, Carol. I know things have been hard. But that man loves you in a way that most people spend their whole life looking for." Carol stood in the garden with her phone pressed to her ear and the October sun on her face and said nothing for a moment. "I know," she said finally. "I've always known that part." At noon, Daniel showered and put on the blue dress shirt Carol had given him 2 Christmases ago and which he had worn approximately twice. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes. The nose his mother had called distinguished and his son had once called crooked, and thought about who he'd been when Carol married him. Young and certain. The farm would be enough. Love would be enough. Work would be enough. He hadn't been wrong about the love. He'd been incomplete in his understanding of what love required. He went downstairs. Owen was dressed too, not formally, but clearly on purpose, in a clean shirt, his hair not a catastrophe for once. "You didn't have to," Daniel started. "I know," Owen said. "I want to." He picked up his phone and then set it down. "Dad." Daniel looked at him. "I'm sorry, I haven't been easy this year." Daniel felt the thing in his chest move again. The locked thing. "You've been 17, he said. That's not easy for anybody. Owen almost smiled. Yeah, well. He looked at his shoes. I want it to work out. For you and Mom. I think you guys. He stopped. I think you're worth fighting for. As a team. Daniel crossed the kitchen and put his hand on his son's shoulder. Briefly, firmly, the way his own father had done. The wordless language of Mercer men. Me too, kid, he said. 3 miles away, at the intersection of Route 9 and Miller Creek Road, something unexpected was happening. Deborah Holloway had driven past the Mercer property at 11, as she had been doing with increasing frequency since Wednesday. And this time she'd seen Pete Dalloway's truck parked on the roadside, and Pete himself tying what appeared to be a small paper lantern to a fence post. She'd stop. Pete Dalloway. What on earth? It's a marker, Pete said, tying a neat bow, so she knows where to go into the field. Deborah looked at the lantern, then at the field, then at Pete. I want to help, she said. Pete looked at her for a long moment. I'm not sure I can make food. I make exceptional food. And I can call 3 people who will call 3 people, and we can make sure that when Carol Mercer walks out of that cornfield tonight, there's a town waiting to celebrate with her. She put her hands on her hips. This isn't just their anniversary, Pete. This is, she gestured, struggling for words. This family has been holding on. They've been here, in this town, on this land, through everything. That deserves something. Pete was quiet. Daniel might not want. Daniel Mercer is the proudest man in Hargrove County, and he would hate the idea, Deborah said. And it should happen anyway. She fixed Pete with a look. You know it should. Pete thought about it. Keep it small, he said finally. And quiet. And on the road, not in the field. The field is theirs. Deborah nodded briskly. Of course, she said, and took out her phone. At 3:55, Owen found his mother in the living room. She had changed, not into anything formal, but into the deep green sweater she wore when she wanted to feel like herself, with her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was standing by the window with her arms crossed, looking out at the fields with an expression Owen couldn't entirely read, something between readiness and apprehension. Mom, he said. She turned. He wants you to go to the northeast field, Owen said. He's waiting for you there. He paused. I'll take you to the edge and show you where to go in. She looked at her son, really looked at him, the way she sometimes forgot to in the rush of ordinary days. At the height of him, the planes of his face that were so much his father's, the brown eyes that were hers. At the fact that he was here, dressed on purpose, offering to walk her to his father. Okay, she said. Same word she'd said to Daniel 2 nights ago. They went through the back door and across the yard in the late afternoon light, the sun going golden already, dropping toward the horizon in that way October afternoons had in Iowa, like the light was in a hurry to get somewhere. The field stretched away from the house in every direction, the corn at full height, the rows running straight and precise toward the far property line. Owen walked beside her without speaking. At the edge of the northeast parcel, she saw the lantern. It was tied to a fence post, a small warm thing glowing amber in the afternoon light, with a narrow path cleared between 2 rows of corn leading inward. Not a wide path, just enough for a person to walk through without brushing the stalks. Carol stopped. She could see, from here, the faint warm glow coming from somewhere deep in the interior of the field. Amber light filtering between the rows. The same light Deborah Holloway had seen at 5 in the morning and texted Sandra about, and which had traveled through the nervous system of a small town all week. He's been out here since Wednesday, Owen said. His voice was quiet. Him and Pete, every night after you went upstairs. He paused. I helped yesterday. Carol looked at her son. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because he needed you to see it, Owen said. Not hear about it. He looked down at the lantern, then back up at her. He's not good with words, Mom, you know that. He never has been. A pause, but this is what he says when he doesn't have the words. Carol stood very still at the edge of the cornfield in the golden October light. 20 years. The weight of them, all the good years and the hard ones. The accumulation of small daily choices and large unspoken fears, the dreams deferred, and the love that had never actually gone away but had gotten buried under so much practical living that sometimes she couldn't feel it anymore. All of it was present in this moment, pressing against the careful composure she'd built. She thought about the brochure at Iowa State, the email with the rolling admissions, the quiet plans she'd been making for a future that was hers alone. She looked at the path between the corn rows, at the amber glow beyond. She walked in. The path was about 30 feet long. She walked slowly, her hands at her sides, the corn stalks close on either hand, the leaves brushing her shoulders. The sounds of the world outside, the road, the wind across the open ground, disappeared almost immediately, replaced by the particular deep quiet of the field, the soft creak and whisper of the stalks moving in the slight breeze. The light grew stronger with each step. She came through into the clearing all at once, the way you come through a door into a room. Threshold, then arrival. She stopped. She had stood in this spot, or something close to it, many times over 20 years. She had stood here in summer heat and winter cold, in the middle of harvests and in the still emptiness after the crop was in. She had stood here in good years and bad ones, and told Daniel that it felt like the heart of the farm. She did not immediately recognize what she was seeing. The clearing was roughly 30 feet across, the corn walls rising on all sides, the stalks interwoven and braced to form living walls of green and gold. The string lights ran through the stalks from every direction, meeting overhead in a soft canopy of amber light that turned the air warm and close and entirely separate from the Iowa October outside. The platform held a small table covered with a cloth, set with 2 plates she recognized immediately, her grandmother's china, the cream and blue pattern that had been packed in tissue paper in the china cabinet for 7 years, 2 chairs, a wooden crate beside the platform holding the old record player, the turntable already slowly turning, the needle just coming down, and then the music started. Patsy Cline. Always. The first notes came out of the little speaker and moved through the air of the clearing like something physical. And Carol Mercer, who had been holding herself carefully composed for most of a year, felt the composure do something unexpected. It didn't break. It opened. Like a window that has been painted shut for too long and finally yields to the right pressure, not shattering, just opening, the air coming through. Daniel was standing at the edge of the platform, blue dress shirt, the gray in his hair catching the amber light, hands at his sides in the deliberate way of a man containing nervous energy through sheer will. He looked at her, she looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The music moved between them. The corn walls held the light around them like cupped hands. 20 years, he said finally. His voice was low. Not a speech, just a fact, offered plainly. 20 years, she said. He came down from the platform and stood in front of her, close enough that she could see the particular lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when she married him, the evidence of all the seasons written in his face. "I'm not good at saying things," he said. "You know that." "I've always been better at," he gestured at the clearing. "This, I know," she said. "But I need to say some things tonight, even if I say them wrong." He exhaled, the sound of a man who has been holding his breath. "I know this year has been hard. I know the last few years have been hard. I know I've asked more of you than I had any right to ask, and I know there are things I haven't given you that I promised you." He paused. "I found the brochure. From Iowa State." She was very still. "I've had it in the truck for 3 weeks, he said. "I didn't bring it up because I was afraid. Not of you going. I want you to go. I want you to do everything you put aside." He looked at her steadily. "I was afraid you'd found something to go toward, and I hadn't given you enough reason to want to figure out the rest together." Carol's eyes were bright. "Daniel, I'm not done," he said gently. "I need to get this out." He reached into his shirt pocket and unfolded a piece of paper, the legal pad sheet, covered in his careful, cramped handwriting. He looked at it for a moment and then folded it back up and put it in his pocket. I don't need the notes, he said almost to himself, then looked at her. I love you. That has never changed, not once, not through any of it. I know I'm bad at showing it, and I know being loved quietly by someone who can't say it isn't the same as being told. He paused. I should have said it more, I should have shown up more. There's a long list of should-haves, and I'm not going to go through all of it tonight because that's not what tonight is. He reached out and took her hand. Tonight is 20 years, he said, and the next 20, if you'll have them. The music played on. The lights held the clearing in amber. The corn stood all around them, his grandfather's land. 3 generations of hard work and love and stubbornness, and it was still here, and so were they. Carol Mercer looked at her husband for a long time. I was going to write you a letter, she said finally. I've been drafting it for months. She turned his hand over in hers, looking at it. The work-roughened palm, the scar on his thumb from the fence wire incident of 2014, the ring he'd worn for 20 years without ever removing it. It wasn't a goodbye letter, I want you to know that. It was, I needed us to be honest about how hard it's gotten. I know, he said. It has gotten hard. The farm, I know about the farm. He met her eyes. I'm going to tell you everything, tonight. All of it, honestly. No more of me trying to manage it alone so you don't have to worry. That ends tonight. A beat. It's bad, but it's not over. And I'd rather figure out what comes next with you than do it right without you. Carol squeezed his hand. I'm going to apply to Iowa State, she said. Good. I mean it. Whatever happens with the land, I need something that's mine, I know. You should have had it years ago, that's on me. She looked at him, at this man she had married in a church on Maple Street on the first Saturday of October 20 years ago. This quiet, proud, difficult, devoted man who had built her a room out of cornstalk walls and amber light because he didn't have the words. Dance with me, she said. Something moved across his face. Surprise, relief, something older than both. He pulled her close. They stood on the bare earth inside the clearing in the amber light. And Patsy Cline sang, I'll Be Loving You Always. And Daniel Mercer danced with his wife in the middle of the field his grandfather had planted. And neither of them said anything more for a while, because nothing more needed to be said. Outside the field, at the edge of the gravel road, it had started. Deborah Holloway had made calls. Deborah's calls had generated calls. By 4:30, there were 11 people gathered on the road near the fence line. By 5, it was closer to 25. People from town, neighbors. Ruth Kaminsky was there, standing at the back of the group with her arms folded and her eyes bright. Sandra from the clinic, Bill, and Linda Foss. Several members of the First Lutheran congregation who'd been at the wedding 20 years ago and felt it gave them standing to be present now. Pete Dalloway stood slightly apart, watching the amber glow in the field. Nobody was loud. Nobody pushed toward the fence. They were a small-town crowd, and they knew instinctively what this was and what it required. They were witnesses, not participants. Someone had brought a folding table, and there was coffee and Deborah's, cherry bars and someone else's apple cake, and the soft sound of people speaking quietly to each other in the autumn evening light. Owen stood at the edge of the group, watching the field. Ruth Kaminsky moved to stand beside him. You helped build it, she said. Not a question. Yeah, your great-grandmother would have told you that this is what the Mercer men do, Ruth said. They don't say it, they build it. She paused. Your grandfather Glenn built your grandmother a porch on the east side of the farmhouse because she said she wanted to see the sunrise. He built it in a weekend without telling her. She found it on a Monday morning. Owen looked at the old woman beside him. Dad told me that story once, he said. I know, I was there. Ruth's voice was dry and warm simultaneously. It's in the blood, the love and the stubbornness both. She looked at the field. The stubbornness is the problem. The love is the saving grace. Owen was quiet for a moment. Do you think they'll be okay? He asked. Young enough to ask, old enough to need the answer. Ruth Kaminsky looked at the amber light bleeding through the corn rows, at the sound of music just barely audible from inside the field, at the 25 people standing on a gravel road in the October evening because a man had built something beautiful in the place where it most needed to be built. Yes, she said, with the certainty of someone who has watched several generations learn and fail and try again on the same land. I think they'll be okay. They came out of the field at 6:15. Daniel first, then Carol with her hand in his. Both of them still in the particular quiet that follows a conversation that has changed something. The amber lights were still on behind them, still warming the corn, visible as a soft glow even from the road. They came through the fence gate and stopped. Carol saw the people first, registered them the way you register something your brain wasn't prepared for. A double take of genuine surprise. 27 people in the fading October light, standing on the road with coffee cups and plates, talking quietly, and then going quiet altogether as she and Daniel came through the gate. Nobody cheered, nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. But Ruth Kaminsky stepped forward, because of course it was Ruth, and put both hands on Carol's face the way an older woman can do with the authority of having watched you grow, and looked at her steadily. 20 years is something, Ruth said, and the next 20 is something too. Carol's breath caught. Then Sandra was there, and Deborah. And Pete was clapping Daniel on the shoulder in the way of men who communicate through physical contact. And Owen appeared from somewhere in the group and stood awkwardly at the edge. I stilled Carol, pulled him in with one arm, and he let her. The food came out on the folding table. The coffee was passed around. The conversation started slowly and then grew warmer as the evening settled in around them. The stars coming out over Iowa one by one, the corn standing tall in the dark on three sides. Daniel stood with Pete, a coffee cup in his hand, watching his wife talk to Ruth and Sandra with an animation he recognized from 20 years ago. The way she talked when she was genuinely present, when the careful composure was down and she was just herself. Hands moving, laughing at something, her brown eyes lit up. "Well," Pete said. "Well," Daniel said. "Is it going to be okay?" Daniel watched Carol. Watched Owen standing beside her now, slightly taller than her, leaning in to hear something Ruth was saying, his face open in a way Daniel had been hoping to see for 2 years. "Yeah," he said, "it's going to be okay." In the weeks that followed, things did not magically resolve. The foreclosure notice from First National Agricultural Bank was real. And it did not disappear because a man had built something beautiful in a cornfield on a Saturday afternoon. The debt was real. The years of hard seasons were real. The choices that had accumulated into this particular crisis were real, and they required real solutions, not gestures. Daniel knew that. Carol knew that. But something had shifted in the architecture of how they faced it. The Monday after the anniversary, Daniel drove to the bank. Not reactively, not with the defensive crouch of a man being summoned to receive bad news, but intentionally, with an appointment he had made himself, and with Carol sitting in the passenger seat of the truck. She had insisted on coming. He hadn't argued. The loan officer was a man named Robert Stafford, mid-40s, careful suit, the particular expression of someone who delivers difficult information professionally and has learned not to take it personally. He had the file open on the desk when they sat down. Daniel recognized the numbers. He'd been avoiding looking directly at them for the better part of 6 months, managing them at a peripheral angle, the way you look at a bright light. He looked at them directly now. Carol looked at them too. Her face was composed and still. She asked 2 questions, both sharp, both specific. Both the questions of someone who had been an administrative coordinator for 6 years and understood how institutional processes worked. Stafford answered them carefully. There was a restructuring option. Not a good option, not a comfortable one. It involved a significant reduction in the remaining acreage, a formal repayment schedule, and several years of operating at a margin that left very little room. But it was not the end of the farm. It was not the end of the Mercer property entirely. It was a door that was still open, barely, at the end of a long corridor. We'll need 2 weeks, Carol said to Stafford, to review this with our attorney and come back with a response. Stafford nodded. That's reasonable. They walked out of the bank into the October morning. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, the file folder in his hand, looking at nothing in particular. We'll have to sell the north parcel, he said. I know. That's 40 acres. I know, Daniel. He looked at her. I know it feels like losing, she said. But it isn't losing the farm, it's keeping the farm. She looked at him steadily, with the clarity she always had in the moments that mattered. Your grandfather kept this land through things that were worse than a bad crop cycle and a high interest rate. You know that. He did know that, okay, he said. She took the file from his hand. Let's get coffee, she said, and then we'll figure out what needs to happen next. She applied to Iowa State in November, the certificate program in landscape architecture and environmental planning, rolling admissions through the 5th-10th of the month. She submitted the application on a Wednesday evening at the kitchen table, with Daniel across from her reading a seed catalog, and Owen somewhere upstairs doing whatever 17-year-olds do when left unsupervised with internet access. She hit submit and sat back. Daniel looked up. Done? He asked. Done. He nodded. Returned to the seed catalog. Then, without looking up, I'm proud of you. She looked at him. He was already back to the catalog, running his finger down a column of hybrid corn varieties with the focused attention of a man who has spent his whole adult life learning to love the practical details of growth. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She got up and poured herself a second cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the dark fields and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The particular lightness of a decision made honestly and without apology, moving forward without abandoning what she loved. The north parcel sold in December. It went to the Hendersons, who farmed the adjacent property and had been quiet but interested for 2 years. It was a fair price, not remarkable, but fair, and it reduced the debt to something manageable within the restructuring terms Stafford had offered. The day the sale closed, Daniel drove out to the property line where the north parcel ended and the remaining Mercer land began, and stood there in the December cold looking at the ground. Ruth Kaminsky appeared from nowhere, as she did. How does it feel? She asked. Like I failed Roy, he said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Roy sold 12 acres to a neighbor in 1963 to keep the rest of the farm through a drought, she said. Did you know that? Daniel looked at her. No, he said. He never told your father either. Thought it was a failure. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind. It wasn't. It was exactly what a man does when he understands that keeping the heart of something means letting go of the edges sometimes. She looked at the property line. The heart of this farm is still yours, Daniel. That's what matters. He stood there for a while after she went back inside. Then he got in the truck and drove home. Owen made his college decision in February. Agricultural Sciences at Iowa State, the same campus where his mother would be taking her certificate. Courses starting in the fall. They laughed about it over dinner when the acceptance letter came, the 3 of them at the kitchen table. And it was the kind of laughter that sounds different when it arrives in a house that has been quiet for a long time. Warmer, more real. We'll carpool, Carol said. I'm not carpooling with my mom, Owen said. You will absolutely carpool with your mom. Daniel watched his wife and his son argue about carpooling across the table and felt something settle in him. Not triumph, not relief, exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of something that had been knocked sideways, finding its level again. The specific piece of a man who has understood, possibly later than he should have, that love is not a thing you have and then keep automatically. It is a thing you tend the way you tend land, with attention and labor and the willingness to adapt when conditions change. He had nearly lost the understanding of that. He was glad he'd found it back. Spring came to Hargrove the way spring always comes to Iowa, late, abrupt, and overwhelming in its commitment. The fields went from brown to green almost overnight, the corn planting beginning in earnest in late April. the air carrying that particular smell of turned earth and possibility that Daniel had known since before he could name it. He and Owen planted the northeast parcel together that year, side by side, working the rows in the early morning before Owen's school day started, not talking much because the work didn't require it. The field was the same field it had always been, the same ground, the same sky overhead, the same rows running straight to the property line, except that here, in the center of the parcel, there was a flattened area where the clearing had been, where the platform had stood, where the string lights had burned through the corn, and Carol had walked in, and the music had played. They planted over it without disturbing it specially, just corn, same as everywhere else. But Owen paused over the spot for a moment before continuing down the row. "We should mark it somehow," he said, "so we remember where it was." Daniel looked at the ground. "We'll remember," he said. Owen considered this, nodded, moved on. The planting continued. The rows filled in. The earth accepted the seed the way it always did, without ceremony, without commentary, with the simple, reliable patience that had drawn the Mercer family to this ground for 3 generations and, it seemed, would draw them for at least one more. Carol got her acceptance confirmation from Iowa State in March, enrolled in the fall cohort. Beginning September, Tuesday and Thursday evenings plus 1 Saturday session per month. She told Daniel on a Thursday night. He was at the table going over field notes, the kind of paperwork she'd watched him do 1,000 times, the pencil moving in the margin the same way it always had. She sat down across from him and put the printed email on the table in front of him. He read it, looked up at her. "September," he said. "September. Are you nervous?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes, you'll be the best one there," he said, simply, like it was a fact he'd already verified. She looked at him across the table, across 20 years, across the hard ones and the good ones. Across the morning she'd stood at the bedroom window wondering if she was done, and the afternoon she'd walked into a cornfield and found that she wasn't. "I need you to keep saying things like that," she said. Out loud. "I know it doesn't come naturally, but I need it." "I know," he said. "I'm working on it. I know you are." She reached across the table and turned the seed catalog right side up. He'd had it upside down for 10 minutes without noticing. He looked down at it, back up at her. They both laughed. It was Ruth Kaminsky who said it best, the way Ruth usually did. She said it to Deborah Holloway in early May, standing in Ruth's garden while the apple trees were just coming into blossom, the two of them drinking tea and looking across the fence at the Mercer property. "Do you think people will remember it?" Deborah asked. "What he built out there? They'll remember it for a generation," Ruth said. "Maybe longer, the way things get remembered in small towns." She sipped her tea. It wasn't about the lights, though. It wasn't about the china or the record player. What was it about? Ruth was quiet for a moment, watching the blossoms move in the spring wind. "It was about a man who had run out of words," she said, "and used what he had instead. The field, the land. The only thing he'd ever been good at loving without reservation." She paused. He said to her, "This is what I am. This is what I've given my life to, and you are worth more to me than all of it." He said it in the only language that ever came easily to him. Deborah was quiet. "And she heard him?" she asked. "She heard him," Ruth said. "That's the whole story." On the first Saturday of October, exactly 1 year after the anniversary in the field, Carol walked out to the northeast parcel alone in the early morning. The corn was in, the stalks cut down to stubble, the field open to the sky the way it only was after harvest. She walked to the center of the parcel, to the place where the clearing had been, and stood there in the October morning light. The ground was bare. The lights were gone. The platform was gone. The record player returned to the basement, then china back in the cabinet. There was nothing to see, but she stood there for a long while anyway. She thought about landscape architecture, about what she was learning in her Tuesday and Thursday evening classes, about the language of spaces, and how the design of a place can shape the way people feel within it, and remember it long after they leave. Her professor had said something in September that she'd written down and put on the refrigerator at home. The most powerful landscapes are the ones that become memory. They stop being places and start being part of how you understand your own life. She looked at the flat, empty ground of the northeast parcel. She understood her own life a little better than she had a year ago, not because anything had been solved neatly. The farm was still a complicated proposition. The restructuring payments were real and regular and would be for years. She would be driving to Iowa State on Tuesday evenings for the next 2 years. Owen would be gone in August, and the house would be quieter in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the strained silence of a family not speaking, but the natural empty space of a child becoming an adult. There were still mornings when she and Daniel talked past each other, when the habits of distance asserted themselves before either of them caught it. There were still moments when she felt the old impatience, the accumulated weight of years when things went unsaid. She didn't think those would entirely disappear. She thought they would get better slowly, the way things get better when two people are actually working at it together. She heard the back door of the house close. Footsteps in the stubble. Daniel came and stood beside her in the empty field, his shoulder close to hers, both of them looking at the place where last year's corn had been, where the clearing had been, where something had happened between them that was now part of the permanent record of their shared life. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I've been thinking about next year, the planting, the northeast parcel." He looked at the ground. "I want to plant something different here. Not corn." A pause. "I thought maybe you'd want to have a say in it, given your coursework." Carol turned to look at him. He was watching the field with his characteristic careful expression, the look of a man who has proposed something that matters and is holding very still while he waits to see how it lands. She felt the warmth move through her, the specific warmth of being known, of being considered, of a man making room where he'd previously taken up all the space without meaning to. "Wildflowers," she said. He looked at her. "There are native Iowa prairie species that would grow in a plot this size without irrigation," she said. "I've been reading about it. The bees need it, and the field drainage would actually benefit from wildflowers," he said quietly, like he was trying the word on. "Just this section, the heart of it." He looked at the ground for a long moment, his grandfather's ground, his father's ground. The ground he had nearly lost and managed by the skin of something to keep. "Okay," he said. She put her hand in his. They stood together in the October field, the bare stubble around them, the sky enormous and blue overhead, the town of Hargrove a few miles distant with its church steeple and its hardware store, and its gravel roads, and its people who had stood on a road in the evening and borne witness to something they understood instinctively was worth witnessing, the heart of the farm. Still there, tended, alive, the way the best things are when the right people refuse to stop caring for them, not perfectly, not without cost, but persistently, honestly, with all the stubbornness that love, at its best, requires.